Hi everyone, and I am back for another AV Room a session to talk about a movie. We call it Yap versus Yap, but sometimes we bring in people who aren't with the film Yap to talk as well, just to sort of spread the love around with the Indiana Film Journalists Association. So I'm pleased to be joined today by Tony Schaab. And Tony, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Chris. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I'll always talk about Dune or any science fiction movie. I'm the senior editor for sciencefiction.com, so I'm always thrilled to dive in on sci-fi stuff, and you can always find my work there. You can come find me on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or anywhere really at Tony Schaab. So feel free to come online and join the discussion. Any and all takers are welcome.
Oh, and it's always great to have a very distinctive name where you don't have to compete for your handle. I don't have that problem,
Yes.
or I don't have that that advantage. So Dune. So we saw this actually as we were recording this last week. This cool new thing where the studios are actually letting us see the movies like a couple of weeks in advance, which is great. So I guess my first question would be, how familiar were you with the original 1984 one with by David Lynch? Had you seen it anytime? Had you seen it anytime recently? And did that color your experience going to see this one by uh, is it Denis Villeneuve, the director of this new one? But tell me what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so obviously I'm familiar with the classic. I've got it on. I've got like the extended, I don't know, like 3 hour edition on Blu-ray. I've seen it, many times over the course of the years. I personally chose not to watch it this week leading up to Villeneuve's version because I didn't I personally didn't want that direct comparison. I know that they're based on the same novel and the same story, obviously, but I knew going into it that the new version was going to be markedly different and intentionally so. So I actually chose not to watch the classic version recently. I think I saw it maybe just a few months ago, just on a random viewing. But I wanted to have that fresh experience where I actually didn't directly compare the two. That was just a personal choice. I know lots of people did directly compare it, and for good reason. But yeah, I chose to willingly go into the new version with my eyes as open to the new version as I possibly could.
Cool. Well, let's just jump right in. So tell me, what was your take on this new one? What did you think of it?
Yeah, so I mean, overall, I enjoyed it. I'm a big fan of these larger scale kind of what people might call quote unquote thinking sci-fi, where all the information isn't directly given to the viewer right out of the gate. There's no opening crawl that explains everything you need to know. There's not this narrator that gives you this huge 5 minute backstory before you even get in.
Huge.
I
Yeah.
mean, yes, exactly. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that I mean this one jumps right in. We get a sentence or two from one of the main characters, and then it dives right into the story. So you really this is a pay attention type of movie where you really can't stop and subtly check your texts on your phone, or I'm not sure if you use the Run P app to figure out where you can go to the bathroom. I'm not sure there's a good spot anywhere in here to leave the theater at any point. So it's a very dense movie, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was very, very fun overall. A little some pacing problems. Even in the slow parts, it was still info heavy where you had to pay attention. But other than a few pacing clunky maybe moments, which were very to me very few and far between. The visuals were astounding. I thought the actors were phenomenal. I thought it was very well done from start to finish.
I liked it too. I would say I liked it more than the first one. Um, Still thought it had some problems. Visually, technically, it is so much an improvement on the first one. I mean, obviously, we've got 37 extra years of cinematic technology development to fall back on, and I think that was one of the things that David Lynch, people forget what a small, tiny little director he was. So he made Eraserhead, which is, his tiny little bizarro uh, horror, whatever you want to call it, film. And then based on that, he was tapped to make The Elephant Man, which was like, this prestigious Oscar nominated and winning film. And then he made Dune. And I don't think, just from a technical standpoint, I don't think he was anyway had the skills or vision to be able to pull off something as big as Dune. Considering that this movie came out the year after Return of the Jedi, and I mean, if you just compare those movies side by side, I mean, one looks like something made by a bunch of high school students compared to Jedi. Obviously, Lucas has had 3 goes at Star Wars stuff, but even the first one from 7 years earlier was so much more technically accomplished. The battle scenes were terrible, terrible. I mean, it looked like guys running at each other and jumping in the air. Then the guy puts his hands up and flips him over them like they're a theatrical troupe / ballet dancers doing exercises. I don't know what the hell that stuff was. Villeneuve's battle scenes aren't super good either. He's got a little bit of that issue of David Lynch's trying to show a battle between 10,000 people using 30 total stuntmen. It's what I refer to as really good directors directing big epics like that. The way they work is that it's like you have the feeling of the frame that you're seeing, but there's stuff happening beyond the frame. There's a whole world, there's a battle, there's stuff going on over here. It's not just we set up these specific 30 guys to fill this frame and that's it. And I think this film still has a little bit of that for the battle scenes. Again, I don't think this director, obviously he made the Blade Runner sequel, which I thought was a fantastic film. I don't think the battle stuff was particularly well done. I guess my biggest complaint about this movie is I found it curiously bloodless, and by that I mean the characters really did not connect for me. Paul, in particular, Timothée Chalamet, I mean, somehow seemed to follow the pattern of the first movie, having these very stilted line deliveries. He gets to have a little more anguish towards the end of the film, where he's really struggling with his destiny as the Kwisatz Haderach, the savior, the messiah of the planet Dune. But I don't know. I really had this feeling of people performing for the camera, and really didn't feel like I really connected emotionally to really any of them. And that was the strange thing, because I was like, this movie looks so great. I thought the way he handled the screenwriters this time around are John Spates, Villeneuve himself, and Eric Roth. And I thought they did a very good job of sort of taking this big sprawling narrative and not just condensing, but streamlining it, showing us the right parts at the right time, like you mentioned, not having that ridiculous extended narrative or narration, not having lots of title cards, not having that terrible thing that Lynch did where every single character you get to hear their thoughts. So they speak and then you hear what they really mean, and they speak some more, then you hear what the other guy really means. And boy, that did not work for the first film. But it's strange how I think from a technical and narrative standpoint, they did a fantastic job with this. I just really did not connect to any of the characters.
Yeah, I would agree on that. And I know the characterization is super hard. I know from reading the original books, from seeing the original film, this one, obviously, to me, the new version here feels infinitely more cohesive. But yes, I do understand what you're saying about the characters. Even I've only just started to kind of dive into the stuff that's out there for the treatment and the thoughts on Joe Dorowski's never got off the ground version of Dune. But yeah, these characters, I think maybe just due to the nature of how sprawling the story is that they're just not given their time. And I agree that Chalamet did the best he could, maybe, but yeah, Paul is just it's such an interesting character, being almost the predetermined savior of the universe ostensibly. I'm sure it's hard to kind of come to grips with that mentally as a character actor trying to put it out on screen. And again, I don't think it's any huge spoiler to say that, within the first few minutes, you see the title card that says Dune Part One. So you know that this isn't the end and we're not getting the whole story here. So I'm sure there's more that was kind of held in reserve a little bit, possibly. But yeah, I agree with you. A lot of the characterization was tough to see the full picture. I really enjoyed what Oscar Isaac gave us as his kind of anguished but still proud ruler. I felt I got way more this movie from the Harkonnens, from Dave Bautista and his gang, than I ever did from the first movie. I felt like I understood kind of where they were coming from. So, but yeah, I think there's just so much going on, even for a movie that spans 2.5 hours plus of what's going to be at least now a 5 hour or more story.
Yeah.
Maybe we just weren't physically given everything that we could, because there's more coming. But yeah, it's tough when you're trying to set yourself up for success long term, and you don't have that immediate positive connection with the characters.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm curious how many people even know going into this movie that it's Dune Part One. I mean, I literally didn't
Yeah.
even know that until maybe a couple of weeks ago.
Yep. Same here. Yeah. They did not market that at all. I don't think so.
And someone, I think it was Bob Bloom, he had in his review on the Film App, he said that they're not yet even shooting Part Two. So presumably, Part Two is not going to be like next year. It might be like 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, which that'll be a challenge just from a standpoint of continuity and the audience's mind to have that. I think something like that Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings movies did well was, having them come out every year, or just about with the Harry Potter movies, since you had that sense of continuity and you weren't detached from the narrative. It's interesting, like I did rewatch the first one, and I had not seen it since it came out in '84, and I actually wrote about it. So as this video comes out, that should have published on the Film App yesterday. So if you haven't already, you can go take a look at that. And what surprised me about, that I'd forgotten from seeing the first movie, it really is divided into two halves, and the first half in the movie feels pretty complete, but takes up probably a good hour and a half of the movie, and then like the last 40 minutes or so is almost like a Cliff Notes version of the second half of the actual conflict, the war, and it's where they're not actually like telling you the story, they're telling you about the story. It's like this happened, and we're going to kind of give you the highlights of it. And as you say, there's a longer version of David Lynch's movie out there. Supposedly there's even the mythological rumored 4-hour cut of it. We should also mention there was a TV miniseries, I think around the year 2000, or maybe it was 1990s, that came out, which I have not seen. I'd be curious at least to see but I'm of two minds on splitting up. On the one hand, I think it's a good choice because you can always tell when a movie is trying to just cram too much narrative into one runtime, even 2.5 hours. And I should say, this was not a slow 2.5 hours for me. It did not drag for me. A little, like I said, I thought there was some pacing areas where they could have picked it up, but it's not like this movie would have been better at an hour and a half instead of 2.5 hours. So I think that's a good choice, because I think they'll avoid the mistake that Lynch made, which is trying to have the actual crescendo of the story where Paul does rise and become this leader and sets the galaxy into conflict, really let it air out. So I'll be curious to see that second movie. But like I said, the way it's been handled and sort of almost they sort of like hit it a little bit. I'm not sure if that was the wisest way to go. And again, if it really does come out like 4 or 5 years later for Part Two, that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. It's definitely. I was surprised to learn that they hadn't shot that as well. I assumed it was a Back to the Future Parts 2 and 3 scenario where they just did it all at the same time to save on cost and production. But I don't know if that speaks to the studio not having confidence, or if that just speaks to because of the strange way that we're living right now, where everybody couldn't free their schedules for that long. I don't know. I believe that the movie is going to be successful enough to warrant the Part 2 to come. But yeah, like you said, I'm thrilled that they didn't try to condense it all into one, because just like you said, the original definitely suffers from that tell but not show mentality at the end, where they tried to squeeze everything in, and you could tell that it wasn't probably what anybody wanted in terms of the finished product. So I'm glad that this new version will get the opportunity to tell that tale in the truly expanded role that it needs. I hope they get back to work pretty quickly. So
Yeah. So I do, and we'll try and get very lightly spoilery here for those who haven't yet seen the movie. But ways in which this film diverges from the first one. I'm not going to say from the book, because the book is obviously much denser. I was surprised. It does follow the general narrative of the first film up to that, the point of the fall of the House Atreides, pretty closely, with some.
Yep.
I mean, there's not like wild divergences. It's like certain characters are given more prominence, certain other characters are given less prominence, or even just sort of disappear. I was curious, in the first movie, we very much have this sense that the Navigation Guild, or just the Guild, is the real power in the universe, and is sort of berating the Emperor and really pulling his strings. And they really, the Guild and the Emperor really aren't in this movie. I mean, we see a few Guild folk, but they don't really talk or have a real role to play. We don't hear or see from the Emperor or his daughter, the narrator, at all. That was interesting. And Fade, the character who's probably really the most distinctive character from the first movie, played by Sting, who's sort of Paul's antagonist on the Harkonnen side. Interesting. First movie they pronounce it Harkonnen. This movie they pronounce it Harkonnen. I'm guessing probably Harkonnen is probably correct. He doesn't show up at all, which I actually like, because it's strange when you're watching the first movie again, is Faye just turns up, every 20 minutes or so to threaten to kill Paul, and I'm going to use just this maniacal figure. And yet he and Paul don't actually meet for the first time until the very, very end of the movie. And it's hard to have an antagonism between people who have never actually met. So your thoughts on ways the film diverge. Again, we don't want to get too spoilery here, but
Sure.
diverge for the first movie or the book.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely felt just like you said, that instead of like the Navigation Guild, instead of this kind of bigger group kind of pushing things, this feels like they're setting things up for potentially a more direct conflict between the Emperor and Paul. The Emperor is definitely the one who seems to be. I mean, they referenced him so much, and he seems to be like this big bad guy that I sort of expected in the post-credit scene. I somewhat expected Ian McDermott to show up and be the Emperor, just because he did it in Star Wars so well. I was like, well, that has to be. But yeah, they're definitely. It feels like they're setting up for a more direct conflict in its conclusion, instead of I'm just fighting the good fight against the system or whatever. So I don't know if that's what they're going for, but that's what it felt like to me. But other big ones, yeah, like you said, I definitely felt like House Atreides definitely had obviously a much different end, not end, but definitely a different storyline. They kind of diverged a little bit in terms of what happened, and I mean, I thought it was good, and it made sense in the scope of the bigger story. I also feel like maybe it's just the way that the story presented it to us, but I felt like there was a much bigger focus on the Bene Gesserit, the group of kind of the mystic females, and how that impacts the story of Paul essentially being the chosen one. I felt like there was a much better focus on that, and that was probably done in an attempt to give the viewer that real sense of, hey, Paul can be something great if he puts himself to it, and that's the story we're truly following, is Paul's personal journey. It just happens to be happening in this huge universe with these massive goings on. So
yeah, I do think that this film gave a better sense of the Bene Gesserit. The first film, they're just sort of these like witch-like figures who are just sort of creepy, and they're the people that whisper into the Lord's ears, and that's all we really understand about them. Right. This movie doesn't directly state, but it gives us the sense that I think there is a line of dialogue where Charlotte Rampling plays the head of the Bene Gesserit, and she says something like, is that they have actually been manipulating the bloodlines of all the noble houses for centuries to create the Kwisatz Haderach, the Messiah, except it's supposed to be a woman, not a man. And that's why they're so antagonistic to Paul and the Atreides, is because they see him as this threat to these long plans to do this. And I think I even read something where their goal was to not have either Fade, Harkonnen, or Paul Atreides die, because their plan was down the line that they would intermingle maybe those guys' children to then create the Kwisatz Haderach or something like that. Interesting stuff. I'll just say on a final note, for me, I think the challenge of this film is one that also holds potential. Is I remember when they split up the final Harry Potter movie, and the Deathly Hallows, and I thought the first of those that bifurcated film was really flat, easily the weakest of the Harry Potter movies. But then it all paid off in the final one, Deathly Hallows Part Two, and you really hit those emotional notes that I felt were missing from the first part. And that's my hope for Dune. Is I think they've got the narrative structure there. They've got a terrific cast. Technically, the film is really, really, really well done. Just a beautiful film to look upon. And so my hope is they're going to sort of find their footing and really hit those emotional high notes that I think are missing in this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I think this film had to, by its nature, had to function as a setup for itself. It's almost the opening act for Part Two, right? It kind of had to serve as its own warm up here to introduce people, have a little bit of that exposition. But for me, I mean, like I said, overall, I loved it. I think this is going to be a rewatch film for me. I'm definitely going to go see it again in theaters because, like I said, like we talked about, the scope is just unreal. Like, this is a movie that begs to be experienced on the big screen. This is a true cinematic experience. So I'm definitely excited to go see it again and continue to kind of ingest it and digest it. So
that's great. Well, on that note, we will say so long. Thanks to Tony Schaab for joining me, and we will see you the next time we do one of these, which will hopefully be very soon. Thanks, guys.